southern Rift Valley Reserve, late morning. The heat had already begun to shimmer across the dry earth when the call came through. A lion was spotted motionless at the base of one of the ravines that cut like narrow scars through the southern edge of the park, not lying in shade, not sheltering from the sun, just still. When Yusuf arrived, the dust hadn't yet settled from the Land Cruiser's tires. He walked the last stretch on foot, slow and deliberate. Below him, wedged between two sharp-faced rocks, was the lion. The animal's ribs lifted in a shallow, uneven rhythm. His back leg was twisted at an unnatural angle beneath him, pressed hard into stone. There was no roar, no resistance. His mouth hung partly open, and from his tongue to the cracked ground below stretched a single line of dried foam, touched by flies. Yusuf crouched a few feet away, keeping low, body turned sideways. No threat, just presence. He didn't speak at first. Just watched the rise and fall of the lion's chest, measured and faint. The lion blinked once, that was all. The gorge was steep and tight, barely 3 meters across where the lion lay, hemmed in by rock shelves on either side. There was no easy route down for equipment or teams. Yusuf radioed coordinates, then unrolled a canvas water bladder and rested it nearby, unscrewing the cap with quiet fingers. He soaked a strip of cloth and laid it gently on the stone beside the lion's paw. Not touching, just near. The lion didn't move. From the ravine's lip above, the wind carried dust and the faint smell of acacia. A bird called once, then went silent. Yusuf glanced up only briefly, then looked back down. The lion's coat was dull and patched. Dried blood clung near his haunch. No open wound, but the signs of a long struggle were everywhere. The way the fur had rubbed raw at the hips, the way the claws were cracked and splintered with stone. The way the eyes stayed open but did not fix. This was not a fresh injury. This had been hours, maybe more. The rescue team wouldn't reach him quickly. There were no direct tracks to this cut in the land. But Yusuf didn't leave. He shifted into the shade of a leaning rock and sat. 10 meters between them, maybe less. Time passed. The lion coughed once, a dry, rattling sound that scraped from deep inside. Yusuf opened a second cloth, soaked it, and this time, with quiet slowness, slid it forward until it just touched the lion's paw. The lion flinched, a twitch, not a threat, and then was still again. "If you fight, you'll break more," Yusuf said, voice low and even. "If you rest, we can try." By early afternoon, the sun had leaned westward. A vulture passed overhead but did not circle. No scent of death here yet, only pain. Yusuf rose once to check his vehicle, then returned. The lion's breathing had slowed further, almost inaudible, but his eyes stayed half open. A sign of consciousness, a sign he was still inside. Down here the stakes were plain. If the lion panicked, he'd tear the ligaments in his leg, maybe rupture a lung against the rock wall. If he stayed still, waited for help, they might have a chance. But every hour made it worse. Deeper dehydration, rising internal damage. There was no middle ground, only risk, only time. The wind shifted again. And this time Yusuf caught a sound he hadn't heard before. A faint cry from somewhere higher along the gorge wall. Not a full roar, not an echo. Just a high-pitched whimper, brief and sharp. He stood, turned toward the direction, and listened. But the sound didn't come again. He looked back at the lion who hadn't stirred. The eyes now followed his movement. That, too, was something. For now, the lion lay between two stone blades, pinned by weight and heat and injury. But he was breathing. And someone had seen him. That was enough for now. Yusuf sat again, cloth in hand, and waited. The sun bent lower, and silence returned. The light had softened, bending gold across the ravine's stone edges when the first sound came again, faint, breathy, high. Yusuf lifted his head slowly. It was not the wind. It was sharper than that. not a bird call either. It rose and fell too quickly, like something trying not to be heard, but needing to be. He stepped away from the lion just far enough to lean along the rock wall and scan the upper edge. Nothing moved, but the sound came again. 3 short pulses, almost like crying. He didn't call out, he simply listened. The lion below had stirred slightly, a soft groan lifting from his ribs as if in response. His ears twitched toward the sound. Yusuf followed the direction with his eyes. The slope above the ravine curved toward a patch of dry brush and loose stone. A ledge wide enough to hold weight but too narrow for a full-grown lion to rest comfortably. Still, the sound was clearer now. It wasn't an adult. It wasn't deep or steady or threatening. It was small, unsure, still learning what it meant to call for help. Yusuf climbed halfway up the slope, careful not to disturb the gravel too much. From there, crouched and quiet, he could just see the shape. 2 small figures, half in shadow, half behind a tangle of branches. Cubs, not newborns, but still small enough to be thin-limbed and wide-eyed. One was standing, trembling on the edge of the slope, its tail flicking short bursts behind it. The other crouched low, paws tucked under. Both stared down toward the ravine, toward the lion pinned between the rocks below. They didn't cry again, not while Yusuf watched. But they didn't leave either. Just watched. Waited. The first cub shifted slightly forward, then backed away again as a stone clattered beneath its foot. Yusuf didn't move. He knew enough to stay still. If they ran now, they might vanish for good. And if they stayed, it meant something else, something far more fragile. They hadn't just followed their father. They hadn't gotten lost. They had stayed nearby, maybe all along. The distance between them was more than vertical. If Yusuf climbed higher, they'd flee. If he shouted, they might panic. And if the father heard them and tried to move, he could kill himself on the rocks below. The tension stretched invisible across the gorge, delicate and silent. Yusuf slid back down to the ravine floor, slowly, 1 foot at a time. The lion's head had shifted slightly toward the ledge. His body was still broken and exhausted, but the direction of his gaze had changed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was listening. The stakes changed in that moment. Before, it had been a question of whether the lion could survive the rescue. Now, it was more than that. If he died here, the cubs might not make it. They were too young to hunt on their own, too small to fend off hyenas, and too close to danger without knowing how to run from it. If Yusuf didn't handle this right, it wouldn't be 1 life lost. It would be 3. The rescue team was still an hour out, maybe more. Yusuf radioed in a quiet update, voice low. 2 cubs, alive, near the ledge. Father's aware. The reply came in a short burst. Understood. He unpacked a soft blanket and placed it near the lion again. Not touching him, but close enough to catch his scent. The cubs would smell it too. Maybe it would hold them near. Maybe it would mean something. Then he poured a shallow dish of water and set it beside the blanket, tilting it so it wouldn't spill on the uneven stone. The wind dropped for a moment. Quiet spread over the ravine. In that silence, Yusuf heard one more sound. A softer one this time. A rustling from the upper slope, like paws shifting gravel. The cubs hadn't left. Not yet. They were waiting. Just like he was. Yusuf sat again, cloth damp in his hand, eyes never far from the ledge above. The lion breathed steadily now, eyes closing for longer stretches, then fluttering open again. Somewhere above, his cubs lay curled in brush, watching the world below. None of them moved. But something had already shifted. Something small. Something vital. By the time the rescue team arrived, the light had softened into the gray gold of early evening. The heat had fallen from the rocks, but the silence held. Yusuf greeted them with a nod, stepping lightly across the ravine's edge to meet them. The lion hadn't moved in hours. His breath came in slow, measured draws, his body slack against the stone. It was as if he'd given over, not in surrender, but in silent trust, as though he knew now that struggle would only break what little remained unbroken. The team worked quickly, but without noise. They lowered themselves with rope and padded gloves, carrying only what was needed: blankets, a field stretcher, soft nylon straps. Yusuf pointed out the position of the leg pinned beneath the lion's torso. One ranger crouched near the forelimbs, hand resting just a breath away from the lion's shoulder. "We go slow," he whispered. "If he is startled, we won't try again today." They didn't need sedation. There was no energy left in the lion to resist. Instead, they moved the rocks in increments, wedging flat planks against the sides to prevent sudden shifts. One by one, they loosened the stones that had trapped him. Not a collapse, but a slow lifting, piece by piece. The lion's ribs twitched once. His tail flicked once in the dust, but his eyes, half open and dull, didn't close. He was watching. Not the humans, something else. As the final weight was lifted, they shifted his hind leg gently outward, avoiding the angle of the injury. The joint was swollen, purpled at the haunch. The fur stripped away to skin in places. Still, no sound came from the lion's mouth. Only the quiet huff of air, warm and strained. They slid the stretcher beneath him, fitted with soft cloth straps that cradled his chest and limbs. It took 4 men to lift. Yusuf helped steady the corners. The lion's head lolled slightly but didn't fall. He remained silent, body lifted from the floor of the ravine for the first time in what might have been a full day. That's when Yusuf looked up. Above the ridge, past the last bend of stone and shadow, 2 shapes stood motionless. The cubs. Their small outlines were clearer now in the low light, thin-legged, tails low, heads held at an angle that suggested neither fear nor curiosity, but something more uncertain. Watching, waiting. They didn't make a sound. The team didn't speak either. They moved slowly toward the incline where a sled waited, fitted with wheels to guide the stretcher back to the vehicle. Every motion was careful. The lion didn't resist, not once. His gaze drifted now, open but unseeing. Exhaustion rode every breath. As they pulled him up the slope, the cubs backed away, just a few steps, then paused again, still watching. Yusuf noticed one of them glance toward the blanket he had left behind earlier. A nose twitched. A paw brushed the dust. Then, stillness. "If they follow," one of the rangers murmured, "they might have a chance." "If they run," Yusuf answered, "they won't." It was a simple truth. The lion would be taken for treatment, fluids, rest, slow healing if the leg wasn't too far gone. But the cubs, no one could take them. Not at that age. They had to choose to stay near, to follow, to wait. At the top of the slope, the lion was loaded into the vehicle, head resting on a folded jacket. Someone covered his eyes with cloth to keep him calm. No straps, no cage, just stillness. Yusuf turned back one more time. The cubs were still there, small and low against the edge of the slope, like shadows that had paused in the shape of animals. They didn't cry, they didn't come closer, but they hadn't left either. As the truck engine stirred to life, Yusuf looked toward them and whispered quietly under his breath, not to them, but to the silence. "He's not gone yet." Then he climbed into the passenger side and didn't look back again. Behind them, the light continued to fade, and the cubs stayed where they were, not moving, not turning away, just watching. The wind settled low as dusk pressed into the southern Rift Valley. Long shadows crept across the ridges above the ravine, stretching over stone and scrub as silence took hold again. The rescue truck had disappeared down the narrow track almost an hour earlier, carrying the lion in stillness and cloth. Only the dust remained, fine and gray, rising in thin curls from the dry earth. but the gorge wasn't empty. Near the rim, just above where Yusuf had first spotted them, two cubs stepped hesitantly into view. They emerged not together, but one after the other. First the bolder one, limping slightly at the forepaw, then the smaller, more delicate sibling who followed at a cautious pace. Their bellies were sunken now, fur dulled with dust. But it was the sound that told more than their bodies. A soft cry, broken and uneven, echoed faintly through the gorge. Then another, short bursts. Searching. Not full roars. The cubs didn't have that yet. These were high, unfinished calls, the kind that hadn't learned whether silence or noise meant safety. They moved along the ledge in restless half-circles, tails down, shoulders low, pausing often to look below where their father had been. Yusuf had not left. He'd remained at the ravine's edge, seated on a folded tarp beneath a solitary fever tree. From there, he watched the cubs reappear. He didn't move toward them. He didn't raise his voice or stretch a hand. Instead, he reached into the pack beside him and pulled out a shallow metal bowl. Water sloshed gently inside. He stood slowly, careful to stay low, and walked 10 steps forward toward the slope that angled up toward their ledge. He placed the bowl in the crook of a stone, letting it settle on the slope where the earth met rock. Then he stepped back. 10 steps. 15. Then he sat again. He didn't speak. The cubs paused. One tilted its head, nose lifting to the wind. The scent would be familiar. Sweat, dust, leather, and the ghost of their father's fur. The other cub stepped forward, then stopped again, ears twitching toward the bowl, but eyes never leaving Yusuf. Minutes passed like hours. The first cub approached the slope slowly, more crawl than walk. Every few steps it paused, crouched low to the earth, and sniffed. When it reached the bowl, it didn't drink right away. It sniffed around the edge, then circled once and twice more. Only then did its tongue flick out quick and cautious. 1 sip, then 2. The second cub didn't move. It watched from behind a knot of brush, body still except for its sides rising with shallow breath. Yusuf breathed quietly through his nose, steady. His hands stayed open on his lap. No motion, no signal, just stillness. What mattered now wasn't just hydration, it was a presence. The cubs had stayed near for over a day. If they left tonight, they might not come back. They'd already lost the sound and scent of their father. The scent on the tarp would fade. The memory of safety would thin, and the wild didn't wait for the grieving. The first cub drank longer now, standing fully. Its limbs shook slightly, not from fear, but weakness. It had likely not eaten in over a day. No milk, no meat, just wind and silence. When it finished, it looked once toward Yusuf, then turned and walked back to its sibling. No rush, no panic. They lay down together, tucked beneath the brush, their bodies pressed close. The crying had stopped. The sky above darkened into ash. No stars yet, only a deep blue haze. Somewhere far off, a jackal yipped once, then fell quiet. Yusuf pulled his blanket around his shoulders. He would not leave tonight. He would stay until the cubs moved, toward life or away from it. Above the ravine, in the last light, 2 young lions curled into each other without sound. They didn't know if safety was coming, but they hadn't run. And for now, that was enough. Morning came quiet. Filtered through the pale veil of low clouds drifting across the southern rim of the valley. The air was cooler now, the dust dampened slightly by mist that hadn't quite become rain. Yusuf stood slowly from his place beneath the fever tree, joints stiff, blanket folded over one shoulder. His eyes lifted first to the slope above the ravine, toward the ledge where the cubs had curled the night before. Empty. No movement, no shapes in the brush. He didn't panic. Cubs didn't always stay in one place for long. They may have moved to a nearby shelter or gone searching for scent, but something in the air felt different. Not urgent, not final, but changed. He climbed the short rise with slow steps, scanning for signs. The bowl from the night before lay overturned, licked clean. Dust pressed smooth around its rim. There were prints there, small, almost delicate, but they were only part of the story. Yusuf looked toward the ravine floor, where the lion had once been trapped, and something caught his eye. He stepped down carefully, tracing the edge of the rock shelf where the rescue had begun. The ground there was drier, untouched by the moisture in the air. Yet in the center, pressed into the dust beside the faint impression of the stretcher cloth, were paw prints. Not one, several, small, uneven, overlapping, the soft indentations of two cubs. They had come down. In the night, sometime between the dusk cries and dawn quiet, the cubs had descended the ravine. The slope was steep, dangerous even for older lions, but they'd made their way down, slowly, likely together, and walked across the stones to the place where their father had lain. The prints formed a soft, almost circular path. One had walked toward the center and paused there. The other had paced the edges, turned back, then stepped closer. Yusuf crouched near the largest mark, a single paw print resting directly where the lion's head had been. No drag marks, no disturbance, just the imprint, as if one cub had sat there quietly long enough to settle its full weight, then risen again. They hadn't come for food. There was none. They hadn't come for water. The bowl had already been emptied. They had come for something else, something Yusuf couldn't name. Instinct, memory, or maybe just the scent of safety, fading but not gone. There were no signs of panic in the tracks, no scrapes from sliding paws, no broken brush, no signs of chase. Just calm movement, in and out. He followed the prints partway back up the slope. Halfway up, they disappeared into the patch of golden grass where the soil was too hard to hold shape. After that, nothing. No sign of direction, no calls. Just silence. Yusuf didn't speak. He simply stood for a while, one hand resting lightly on the ravine wall. The prints had already begun to soften at the edges, the mist loosening their lines. By mid-morning, they would vanish. He unpacked the second water bowl from his satchel and set it beneath the brush again, where the cubs had first appeared. He left a strip of cloth beside it, the one that had rested near their father. It no longer held his heat, but the scent would linger a little longer. If they returned, they'd find it. If they didn't, then this was their last goodbye. Yusuf didn't try to follow. Cubs that young moved quickly when spooked, and if they scattered too far, they'd be lost to the terrain. No, this wasn't a chase. It was a watch. He returned to the ledge and sat down again, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the brush ahead. Somewhere in the stillness, two young lions moved, not hidden but not yet found, and down below their prints remained for now, circling the space their father had left behind. By midday, the wind would lift the dust again, but for this brief morning, the ground told the truth. They had come. They had known. And they had said something in silence that Yusuf would never forget. The field station lay quiet beneath the low sweep of the escarpment. The lion had been moved to a shaded enclosure ringed by thorn branches and woven netting, far from the road but close to water. Days had passed since the rescue. The swelling in his leg had begun to ease. The wounds had been cleaned. Fluids had been given in slow, steady drips. His body, in all visible signs, was healing, but he would not eat. Each morning, Yusuf arrived early. He brought fresh meat, cooled in canvas wraps, and placed it just inside the enclosure on a flat stone. Then he sat on the opposite side of the netting and waited. The lion lay still, ribs rising gently beneath his coat, eyes half-lidded. He didn't growl. He didn't turn away. But he never touched the food. Only when the wind shifted, when the breeze pulled gently from the north, did the lion lift his head. Slow and deliberate, nose tilted faintly toward the distant cliffs. That's where the cubs had been. The silence between Yusuf and the lion had grown familiar. There was no effort to fill it, no calls, no coaxing, just presence. Yusuf would sit for hours, legs crossed, palms resting on his knees, watching the lion's eyes trace something far beyond the enclosure walls. Not pain, not fear, just searching, as if he was still waiting for a sound that hadn't returned. The team tracked the area daily, walking the perimeter of the ravine, checking the grassland for scat, prints, signs of movement. Once they found fresh cub tracks near a stream bed, pressed into soft earth beside reed clusters, but by the time they arrived, the prints had already begun to fade. The cubs were still moving, still out there, but they had not returned. The lion didn't seem confused, nor angry, just still. His body was regaining shape, but his hunger remained absent, and with each passing day the risk grew clearer. If he didn't eat soon, his recovery would falter, the muscle around the damaged leg would begin to waste, and if it reached a point of no return, the release they were hoping for would never come. Yusuf never forced it. He never pushed the food closer, never raised his voice. Instead, he tried something different. On the 5th day, he unfolded the cloth the cubs had touched, the one placed near the water bowl, and laid it on the ground just beyond the stone. It was faint now, the scent likely washed by time. But it was a memory, however thin. The lion looked at it once, then closed his eyes again. Later that evening, just as the light was fading, Yusuf thought he saw something shift in the lion's body. A twitch in the tail, a small pull of muscle along the shoulder. Nothing more. But it was the first motion beyond breath in nearly a full day. He didn't speak. The sky turned violet above the hills, and night came on gently. In the dark, the thorn enclosure crackled with wind, and somewhere far off, a hyena laughed once, then fell silent. The lion didn't respond. Still, Yusuf waited. He returned every morning, every evening. He removed the spoiled meat without a word, replaced it with fresh cuts, sat, waited. When the wind changed, the lion's nose lifted again, always toward the cliffs. No one knew what memory he held there, whether it was scent or echo or simply instinct, but it was enough to keep his head up, and that was something. Time moves differently now, not in hours, in breaths, in glances, in the space between wind and stillness. The lion had not eaten, but he was still watching. So Yusuf stayed and waited anyway. At dawn, the escarpment glowed pale, touched first by the thinnest line of gold. Mist hovered low across the short grasses, folding gently through the trees around the holding enclosure. Yusuf was already there, sitting quietly on the low stool near the outer fence, a thermos untouched at his feet. The lion had not stirred all night. His body lay curved beside the blanket now softened by days of dust. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was steady. No meat had been touched, no motion made. Then, just as the sun lifted enough to break the shadow, Yusuf saw them. Two shapes, thin and quiet, moved through the mist like things remembered. The cubs. They came not from the ravine's direction, but from the western edge, where the land dipped into acacia and pale thorn. They walked side by side, not rushing, not creeping, just forward. Their limbs looked leaner now, their coats dulled by distance and exposure, but their movement was sure. They didn't pause at the tree line. They didn't call out. They just approached. Yusuf stood slowly, heart steady, hands low at his sides. The field station was quiet, no vehicles stirring, no other rangers near. The cubs crossed the outer path and slipped through the narrow breach in the bush line where the fencing ended. They had found the way on their own. The lion was still resting, his breath shallow but present. As the cubs reached the enclosure, Yusuf stepped back, behind the outer tree, not to startle, not to interrupt. One cub stepped through the low fencing gap, cautious but not afraid. It moved toward the lion, nose twitching. The other followed, smaller, slower, head held low to the ground. They said nothing, no cries, no calls, just the soft pads of their paws brushing the dirt. The first cub reached the lion's paw and paused there. For a moment it stood still, then bent low and pressed its small head against the lion's foreleg. The lion didn't lift his eyes, but his tail moved once, a slow shift of dust behind him. The second cub moved closer, circling slightly, then curled itself against the lion's rib cage, tucking into the soft dip between his flank and leg. It didn't nestle. I didn't sleep. It simply lay still, pressed against the body it had followed across silence and time. Yusuf stayed in the shadows. He did not approach. He did not speak. His throat tightened, but he held his breath quiet and deep. The lion opened his eyes. Just once, long enough to see the shapes beside him. He didn't lift his head. He didn't move, but something changed. His chest rose deeper. His jaw relaxed. And for the first time in 6 days his mouth opened slightly, just enough to exhale. The cubs didn't play. They didn't climb or pace. They remained where they had landed, one touching his paw, the other cradled to his ribs. A stillness filled the air, not heavy, not sharp, just whole. An hour passed, then another, and they didn't leave. When the other rangers arrived, Yusuf raised a hand before they spoke. No words were needed. The scene spoke in something older than language. Here was the truth. The lion hadn't waited for food. He hadn't waited for strength. He had waited for them. And now, with them beside him, there was no more waiting. There was only the morning light, rising through the branches, the dust softening under paws, and 3 bodies, no longer separated, breathing in rhythm against the earth. By dusk, the light had grown long and pale over the southern rift. The wind softened to a hush, bending the dry grass in slow, even waves. Inside the enclosure, no voices rose. No motion stirred the air. The lion lay in the same place he had all day, ribs rising gently beneath the warm press of the smaller body curled at his side. The second cub had not left his paw since morning. Yusuf had watched quietly, seated beneath the same thorn tree, his body still, his hands folded loose in his lap. There was no need for intervention now. No injections, no food. The lion had not eaten, but he had breathed with purpose. That was enough. His eyes had opened once, just once, and then they closed again. The sun reached the edge of the western hills and slipped behind them without sound. In the soft glow that followed, the lion exhaled. A long, shallow breath released without resistance. His chest fell once, then it did not rise again. No sound came from the cubs. The one curled at his ribs pressed tighter for a moment, its muzzle lifting just slightly against his fur. Then it lowered its head and stilled. The other stepped once around the body, circled near his face and sat. Not in panic, not in confusion, in quiet, in understanding. Yusuf did not move. He stayed through the night. Wrapped in a wool blanket, seated just beyond the low fencing. The moon rose in silence, casting silver across the dust. In the hours that followed, the cubs did not leave the lion's side. They did not sleep. They did not cry. They only stayed close, one pressed to his ribs, one against his paw. When the cold wind passed through, they shifted slightly but never drifted away. By dawn, the enclosure was empty. The lion's body lay where it had been, undisturbed, his frame stretched in final rest. But the cubs were gone. No cries, no tracks in the earth, not a single broken twig or fresh paw print in the soft dirt near the fence line. Just absence. Yusuf stepped forward slowly. He crouched beside the lion, laying one gloved hand gently on the still flank. The warmth had left him, but the peace remained. A stillness not of suffering, but of closing. a circle that had waited until it could finish in silence. He stood, shoulders heavy but sure, and stepped outside the enclosure. The morning light came gold through the branches, painting the brush in thin streaks. He walked a little farther, up the path toward the edge of the ravine, where the first calls had once echoed through stone and wind. There was nothing now. No movement in the trees, no whisper in the grass, just the sound of breath and the waiting hush of land untouched. He scanned the horizon once, not searching, only acknowledging. The cubs would not return here. They had stayed as long as they needed. They had said what only they could say, and now they were gone, carrying with them whatever memory their bodies could hold. Yusuf placed a hand on the low branch beside him and closed his eyes. "Safe," he whispered. The breeze moved through the valley in reply, a rustle in the leaves, a sway in the grass, then nothing else. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, 2 young lions moved forward, not followed, not watched, not claimed, only remembered.